One of the hallmarks of Paul's letter to the Philippians is that of joy, overcoming joy, exuberant joy, joy in Jesus. He uses the term joy or rejoice 16 times in that short letter to his friends. Now, today I'd like to talk about the joy that Paul has amidst adversity, the joy of the Lord in spite of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Later on in the letter in chapter 4, verse 4, Paul says this, that rejoice in the Lord. I will say it again, rejoice. Some translations say rejoice in the Lord always. And then later on in chapter 4, around verse 12, Paul teaches us that he's learned to be content in every circumstance, in every situation, whether to abase or to abound, whether to have plenty or to have little, whether to be full or to be hungry. He's learned to be content in every situation. Now let me remind you of Paul's adverse circumstances, his adverse situation as he's writing this letter. Paul's writing from prison in Rome. He'd already been in prison for a long time. He'd been arrested in Caesarea and spent 2 years in prison there. Then he appealed for his case to be heard by Caesar. He was transferred to Rome, and he spent another 2 years in Rome. Now, this was towards the end of his period in Rome, so he's probably already been in prison for three and a half years. Now, Rome had 10,000 elite soldiers. They were part of the imperial guard. They were tasked to take care of Caesar. And Paul was assigned one of these guards 24/7. He had a guard chained to him day and night. That was the adversity of situation. Although Paul rented his own accommodation, he was under house arrest. And in fact, he's writing to the Philippians to thank them for the offering towards defraying these expenses. Don't think of Paul living in a penthouse somewhere in the lap of luxury. He was under guard. He was chained to a elite guard. And every 8 hours, they changed the guard. And then, of course, Paul had a fresh captive audience. Now, it's during this time of incarceration and these adverse circumstances that Paul's writing this letter of encouragement and joy. And Paul saw this as an amazing opportunity for the gospel. In fact, in chapter 1, verse 12 and 13, he wants his friends to know what is happening to him, that the fact that he's in prison is having the opposite effect to its intended purpose. Instead of the gospel message being squelched, it is flourishing. And that everyone knows, and especially the soldiers know, that he's in prison for the sake of Jesus Christ. In fact, when he ends his letter to the Philippians, he brings greetings from all the saints, and especially those of their household of Caesar. In other words, people in Caesar's household, in the prison guard, came to know Jesus. They were part of the church. And then he also says that the followers of Jesus in Rome have taken courage to share Jesus with much more boldness and fearlessly. So those are the advantages of him being in prison. The soldiers have come to know Christ. Everyone knows that he's in prison for the sake of the gospel, and the believers are sharing with much more boldness. It's unlikely that our circumstances are adverse as Paul's. Being in prison for many years, being chained to an elite guard 24/7. Whatever your circumstances are, no matter how adverse they are, in the midst of those circumstances, let's be encouraged to rejoice in the Lord, not rejoice in the circumstances. Rejoice in the Lord and be content with who we are, where we are, what God is doing in our life and doing through our life. May God bless you abundantly. Remember, the joy of the Lord is our strength. Let's rejoice in him amidst our adverse circumstances. God bless you.